Hello, welcome you guys to the afternoon summit. We are so excited to be a part of the Dream Summit. It has been fantastic all day. We're thrilled to have our presenters here. We have Dr. Kazembe, I'm sorry, Julia, I don't want to mess it up. Collazo. Sorry. I practiced it 1,000 times and still let the nerds get to me. I really did. I swear I did. And then Kevin Colbert. It's been awesome. I am Selena Guilbeaux.
And I'm Raven Cole, and Selena and I are going to be your moderators for our panel today. We're actually Lab Education, Louisiana Anti-Bias Education, and so we are an organization we are teachers that are for teachers. We support teachers. And so our mission, we empower educators to actively challenge bias and racism while embracing diversity. So that's our goal, and we are so excited to be here today. So let's go ahead and we're going to kind of kick things off. We've had just the best afternoon of presenters. So I have a few things that I want to throw at you presenters. So Dr. Kazembe, you kind of started us off today giving us some great context about Dr. King's life. Specifically, you talked a lot about how, the way that people perceive him with like nonviolence, and you talked about passivity. And so today I wanted to kind of throw this question out to our presenters about how there is this kind of question of passivity versus engagement, right? Engagement and action in our equity work. So I wanted to ask, what does this engagement look like in this equity work for you, right? What does this action and engagement look like? So I want to actually start us off with Julissa, because Julissa had this really just wonderfully planned out explanation about her students' dreams. So Julissa, would you start us off, please?
Sure, yes. So action and putting action behind our, sorry, you need to repeat the question one more time. Okay, here I see it. What does engagement in this equity work look like for you? Well, actually, Kevin talked a lot about the importance of reading and staying as a reader too, and I feel like that is really important. And Dr. Kazembe, like at the end of your presentation, just putting a bunch of books and literature out there where we can continue, and starting that even, like I teach in the younger elementary grades, so starting that work as reading is one of the first things that we can do to build our students up to be lifelong learners, but not just learners, but people who are doing the work of equity. And I think it starts with reading. So that may not look like, front and center action, but that is an action that you can do from your home that definitely is important work as well.
Amazing. I love it. So I'm a former English teacher turned media arts teacher. So I'm like, yes, all of the reading. And so Kevin, you had this great piece too, talking about how important reading is, especially teaching history and social studies. Could you maybe elaborate more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. First, big ups, Julissa, like the babies. Like I always marvel at teachers who are able to teach the younglings. I'll just say from middle school down, because I don't have those tools. So bless you for that. I think equally as important, reading is super important. Like, and Dr. Kazembe, like throw books at people. Like, and that is super important. But I think also equally as important, and it comes like with the job that we all do, is listening. Like if I'm like throwing content at my students all day, like that's good, but it goes both ways. I have to be able to hear them and listen to them and reach them to where they are. And I think a lot of times, like I might even go on a limb and say most of the time, like when we're talking about equity and dealing with issues with equity, it's oftentimes a one-way street because people just aren't listening. And I think that's a skill that I think we all need to hone. And I definitely have gotten better at it and get better at it as a teacher. Like it's just part of the job. Like you have to It's the first thing if I'm working with a student teacher, I'm like, you gotta listen. Like you have to listen to what they're saying. We'll get to the content here in a minute, but I'm like, you gotta listen to what they're saying. And everybody brings a lot of stuff to the table, good, bad, and indifferent, but you're not gonna know about it unless you listen. So I think that's equally as important, but reading is fundamental. Like it's the key. You need the knowledge.
Awesome. Y'all can't see my fingers underneath, but I'm like snapping for everybody. Dr. Kazembe, so I felt like my hand was like frantically writing as I was listening to your session, because there was just so much about engagement and about action. Also the ending with all of these books that, right, like if you want to get educated, you need to inform yourself. These are the books Selena was typing for me. I was like, you got that list? We need to tweet that out later. But Dr. Kazembe, if you would elaborate maybe a little bit about what does engagement look like for you? What has this experience been?
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the first two remarks. I share with you wholeheartedly on that. When I think about the question, I think about one of the great books by the great master educator Paulo Freire. He did a book with another activist, educator, scholar, Donald Macedo, Macedo, and the book was called Reading the Word and the World. So when I think about the kind of equity work that is necessary in the task of equity workers, it boils down to, are we helping young people especially develop clarity about the world that they live in order so they can plot a course that would make them appear intelligent as opposed to unintelligent. So this means understanding our context. Right? We live in a context now where there's 2.1 million people imprisoned in this country in the prison industrial complex. We got $1.6 trillion student loan bubble that will pop at some point. $700 billion spent on bipartisan military funding. 0.1% of the wealthiest of the wealthiest of the wealthiest have increased their fortunes by over $5 trillion just during the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. We're experiencing a right-wing takeover of school districts across the nation. We're right here in Indiana. One lawmaker said that when teachers are in the classroom, they happen to be teaching about fascism and Nazism, they're supposed to be neutral on those things. So we're seeing this rise of right-wing extremism and white racist domestic terrorists rising up, culminating in this treasonous insurrection last year. So what would Dr. King say about all of that? How would he have positioned himself in the face of all of that? And then what would he insist that we do in the face of all of that? So in my view, part of the equity task, or the task that's in front of us, is that we have to impart and introduce people to education, true education, which is supposed to help us develop and practice courage and integrity.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that kind of like, we can go all the way with this conversation, right? This is not even a 45-minute conversation, but we had some really great presenters in the AM sessions, right, that were talking about how, even just getting people involved in the work can be really difficult because of the way that the opposition to the work has kind of shown up, right? We have people that are people in our community that are very vocally against some of the equity work. And so I'm just curious, kind of throwing this out to any of the presenters here, is have you experienced opposition within this work, right? Within your trying to be engaged and trying to create action, and what's been your experience with that? So anyone, feel free.
Yeah, I can roll with that first. That's a loaded, important question. Like you hear the word equity all over the place, and a lot of times, at least in my experience, being a Black male in this country, you hear a lot of times these words, and it just kind of puts a name to something that you kind of already felt, or like, oh yeah, that's what we're calling it now. Like, so when I heard the word equity, I was like, okay, well, what exactly does that mean? And I do know in education, I mean, I'm an educator, so I can tell you in meetings of education, around different districts, in this district, like, it's almost like this word where it's like people are walking on eggshells around, and it's like no one really wants to actually grab it and tackle it, and it starts this dance, which I think is I don't want to call it an American tradition, but I don't know what else to call it. Like, it's just a thing where it's like, instead of actually listening and doing the work, like, or learning about what it is people are talking about, like Dr. K said, you got to know what you're talking about first, and then you got to listen. So usually that word comes up right now in education. It's coming up right now, and it gets either attacked or danced around. And the frustration for me is just like when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody or a stakeholder or somebody that's making decisions. It goes back to that they're either not hearing you or they refuse. I don't want to say can't see what you can see. That no one's can experience things that I do, but you can listen. It's the not listening part that is so frustrating, and I guess gets old after a while. You know, it's part of where my white hairs and my beard come from. I'm like, you're not listening to me. Like, you're not hearing me. I'm trying to tell you about something, and then it gets pawned off as, oh, well, that can't be it. But let's get to this equity. I'm like, well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about equity. I'm talking about systemic racism. I'm talking about, like, when you actually put words to the thing you're talking about, and in this case, equity, a lot of times it gets dismissed by people who either can't see it or refuse to see it. It's like the idea that I think we all can agree on this panel that racism exists, but you're hard pressed to find somebody who's going to be like, yeah, that's me. Like, I'm a racist. Like, it's like we know it exists, and it whether it's passive, or active racism, it exists, but it's hard to for people to come to the table and admit, I'm part of the problem or I'm part of the solution, and I think people just want to have an honest conversation, but that's the most difficult thing to have when people are either dancing around it or they're flat out ignoring the word. Like, and right now, if we're talking about equity, that word gets ignored. It puts on a billboard, but it gets ignored about what it actually is.
I think, I work in a teacher education program, actually preparing pre-service teachers for licensure to become professional educators. And, maybe that the percentage of white female teachers in this country is something right around 86%. Right here in Indiana, it's 93%. That is to say, 93% of all K-12 public school teachers are white women, which is a civil rights issue, if you ask me. So one of the major impediments that I run up against, and I think we all have experienced this, and what makes our work so challenging, we're dealing with people who would rather believe than think. And when you are dealing with someone with that kind of disposition, then the emotionalism comes in, self-interest and interest convergence comes in. And then just in the history of this country, there is a history of white interest convergence. I maintain that white supremacy racism is the number one organizing principle in this country and in the world. And it is very, very difficult when someone has been educated, like a pre-service teacher that I meet at age 20, 21. They spent 2 decades being indoctrinated, living in a world where people told them that, and these are the people with their primary and formative education, people that look just like them that they love, have told them that white people invented everything, including the air, right? And they looked around at a media that has reinforced and reified white supremacy. They've looked at, you can walk into someone's home and look at the pictures on their wall. You can look at the magazines. You can look at the movies that are in their Netflix queue. You can look at the bookshelf, if they got a damn bookshelf, right? You can look at everything around them to the left and to the right, reifies the fact that they are superior and that other people are irrelevant or marginal at best and irrelevant at worst. So then they meet someone like me at age 20, and you run up against me, I'm coming with it. You're going to get a conscious interrupt when you meet someone like me, because I know who they are and I know who I am. You see, so it makes it very, very, very challenging. And so what I do is I have to look at things in context. I look at the context in which we're doing our work. We're not doing our work in a context that they were in the 1950s or the 1940s or even the 1840s when Black people could just be mass killed, just lynched with impunity. We're doing our work in a different context, same specter of violence and stuff like that. But there are certain forms of mobility and freedom and access and things and resources that we have that are forebears did not have. So I'm trying to understand the historical, and I'm trying to understand the contemporary, but I'm trying to make the through line justice, because we can't compromise on justice. We can't compromise on integrity. Last point, I think also, and this is the irony too, and this is where it becomes very helpful to hold a mirror up to people. Some of the most vitriolic, hardcore racists and hypocrites are white, evangelical, moderate, liberal Christians. These are the people who Dr. King identified in the last few years of his life as being the main ones who are perpetuating white supremacy racism. So it's very, very, very ironic to me, and it's so interesting whenever this is pointed out, that the people who know the least about people that do not look like them, the people who have the most vitriolic and vicious and depraved dispositions in terms of anti-Black racism, are also the same people that love Jesus, right? And I always jokingly say, jokingly but not jokingly, if Jesus were to come back today with a lot of these folks that I'm dealing with, with their disposition, they will waterboard him. If he were to come back today looking like it says he looks in the book of Revelation, they would waterboard him. So I try to hold that mirror up and to get people to question critically and deeply how they think and the quality of their thinking, and even before that, if they're thinking.
I think before we move on to our next question, I think you bring up a really good point, Dr. Kazembe. Like the fact that, like the whole concept of a mirror, and the fact that, you know, whatever your beliefs or thoughts are, down to it, we're all human. And I'm gonna bring it back to Netflix. This one's for you, Kevin, since I know you like to binge watch Netflix as well. But I watched a video recently from Netflix, and it was the Explained series with The Mind. It was awesome. And so right now I'm thinking about what we're talking about, in that, you know, they share these beliefs, or they want to do these things, or whatever it is. The one thing that they mentioned in the video is that there are like these shared values, right? That at the end of the day, some of our motivations are very much shared, like for the sense of wanting to be, shared sacred values. Thank you. And so this, at the end of the day, want to be a part of a community, but their execution of it is what becomes problematic. And so I think at Lab, you know, what we always are, our focus, and when talking with educators and to kind of unpack some of those boundaries, or those do some of that unlearning, is recognize the values that we share, and that while maybe their execution of that value is the part that's getting in the way of that. And one conversation in particular, I'm thinking about a teacher who teaches special education, and she was sharing that she didn't kind of understand some of our conversations around systemic racism. She didn't see it. And so I brought it back to her, what she does do. And I was like, well, you're part of special education, right? And when you see that a student, all students deserve an education. She's like, yeah, right. And she's like, you know, and so when you see a student who can't meet an expectation, don't you support them in some which way? Yeah, because they all deserve it. And I was like, in the same sense, and then brought it back to the other side. And she was like, oh. And so I think that's really important, that we remember that there are bridges between people, and that we use those bridges to help them learn and understand the other side, the other perspective, or a new perspective, or a different perspective. But rolling with this conversation, you guys are going. My pen can't keep up. So I wanted to throw this out there with you guys. How do we encourage and support dreaming in education? All of you guys talked about, you know, dreaming and thinking of a different future, and the action that goes with it, and supporting dreaming in a classroom. But how do we like really support dreaming in education? And how do we make that learning and dreaming relevant for them? I know we talked about that, like dreams seem very, you know, far out, but how do we help them understand the impact of those dreams, the potential of those dreams, and the steps that need to happen to get there? So, Julissa, I would love to start with you, because I know you talked about dreaming with your students, and you have shared all the different ways that you do that in your classroom. So how do you support dreams in education, students, teachers, whomever?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that we can do for ourselves is to be advocates for ourselves. And so I try to instill that within my students all of the time. Writing is so powerful. And so I want my students to know that their words matter and their writing will like live forever. Even if you're 8 years old now, like your writing lives on. And so I think that one of the things that we can do as educators is to teach students how important their voice is, and that will help them think for themselves, right? We don't teach kids what to think, we teach kids how to think, and then they can put their words, to advocate for themselves. You don't like that you only get chocolate milk at lunch? Well, write about it, talk to someone about it, or we can get to things that are more serious than that, right? Depending on what they see as their need. And so, yeah, that's my answer.
I love that. So more than just asking students for their input and creating some type of simulation, right? Oh, what if you did write this essay about chocolate milk? Anyway, moving on to the next unit once they're done writing it. Like, right, that follow-up of you've written it. Now let's go talk to that person you've written it for. What are we going to do about it? I love that. Showing them the impact of their voice and not just doing it. Love it. Dr. Kazembe, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. I think for me, we have to give people access to first-class information. I think it's very, very important that young people especially are able to imagine. But in order to do that, they have to be able to see themselves in curriculum. They have to be able to see positive, affirming images of themselves. They have to have teachers who are, if they are professional, you're supposed to be inclusive. You're supposed to be culturally inclusive. You're supposed to have a disposition rooted in equity and one that is rooted in diversity and multiculturalism. So I think we have to tell the truth. And we have to give, especially today's student, we have to give them accurate information. One of the dangers in this internet age is that I grew up I'm 52. I don't mind telling my age at all. I'm 52. I was born in 1970. I'm a student of hip hop. And I came up at a time when we didn't have the internet, right? We didn't have this device where you could type something in and get an answer back in 0.111111 second. You had to earn your understanding when I was coming up. You had to actually read. Oh my God, you had to read, right? Dewey Decimal System. You had to actually go to the library and actually look for books. You have to have the book, you know what I mean? So I'm old school, right? So I believe in the analog age, we had more appreciation for knowledge and learning. We had more patience. And we had a disposition that leaned toward wanting to know and being curious. Today's student, the way the internet has and social media has made people incurious. So one of the things we have to do is help make them curious again. And the first thing is you have to teach them about. They want to know about themselves. So a student may not be interested, for example, in the 1960s. They may not be interested in Ella Baker or Fred Shuttlesworth or Diane Nash. But what if you frame the question in this way? What was your grandmother doing in 1960? And you framed it around critical media literacy. And see, all of a sudden, you've created a gateway. You've sparked the imagination in a creative, innovative way. This is something that, this is something that I think works as a gateway and a contour to greater learning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely the student life connections, right? Because I will definitely say as a student, some of what we learn just seems so disconnected because it's the past. And that's how it's kind of, or at least that's how it was taught to me, right? Just dry, old, and dusty, just somewhere over there that I can't even touch. And so like the concept of connecting it to people or know of is very important because they're able to then, apply what they've learned to, just what they already know. Studies have shown that students retain information when it's connected to something else instead of just this ambiguous idea. I love it. Kevin, did you want to add?
Yeah, like you talk about segues from Julissa to Dr. K to Lena, like y'all, like through line, right? Where I'm going with this, like First of all, Dr. K, the analog, big up generation. Man, you want to spark a week-long debate? Like, go back to 1986 and then have somebody say, "No, I'm telling you the stats for this." You have to wait like weeks. Like, look, calling a store for a phone book. Who got them Britannicas? Like, that was a whole nother. I joke with my kids about that today. They have that might as well be the Stone Age, but there was value. You're not lying. There was value in that. And Lena, like, to kind of piggyback off what all you all were saying, like, this was a couple years ago, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee. We had we were having conversations in class, and you all are so right. Dr. K is spot on. You got to have first class information. Like, you have to, and it's equally as important. You have to connect it. You got to connect it to now, because otherwise, like you said, Lena, it gets viewed as something dusty. Even though what's dusty was like my reality, like, or it well, I lived through that dust. So but it's like part of my job is to be like, all right, well, okay, so you said that's dust. Well, let me dust it off, make it shiny for you, and show you now. So I remember we were having the conversations about Colin Kaepernick at the time when he got drummed out of the NFL and he took a knee. Well, actually, he took a knee out of respect for the military, which is a whole other conversation. But I remember drawing a through line, like Dr. King, throughout his career, throughout the civil rights movement, like, he was not popular at all. He was hated. Like, and then in the second wave, even after the Civil Rights Act, coming up north to Memphis and marching in Cicero and Illinois, like, it was not accepted in the North. Like, that movement happened in the South. It ballooned and benefited everybody, but as Dr. K said, the well-meaning, educated white folks in the North, they were worse. At least in the South, there was a line, like, you keep your black tail over there. In the North, it was like this, oh yeah, come over here. But then you do, and you wake up in the morning and it's like, N-word go home on your thing, or they're throwing rocks at your head, or there's a different level of vitriol. But you have to draw those through lines. So I remember the same people. And this was a very unpopular notion, but it's true. The same people that were, for whatever reason, were spitting negative comments or just hating the fact that Colin Kaepernick was peacefully protesting. Like, no matter what side of the fence you fall on, the man was peacefully protesting. He wasn't breaking any rules. So the same people that were burning jerseys and hating on him, I'm like, y'all are the same people who would have been throwing stones at Dr. King. They'll put his speech up. They'll billboard it. They'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm all about inclusion." Like, they look at posters from the civil rights movement. The Little Rock Nine walking into the school, and the white women spitting on them and stuff like that. And like, oh, that's terrible. I'm like, well, that was you. Like, that was you. Like, you feel this way about Colin Kaepernick. Well, that's different. So it's like we have to draw these through lines, just like Dr. K said, like, connecting, because even though it's 2022 and a lot has changed, there's a lot of things that haven't. So you can easily draw connections between stuff that's happening right now that's relevant, shiny, and new in our young people's lives that connects to the, as they say, the dusty stuff from back in the day. And one example of that was what I did with Colin Kaepernick. He's different. He's not Dr. King. That's not what I'm saying. People were like, oh, he's not. No, he's not. He was standing for something, and people were hating him for it, and there were people, people want to act like it didn't happen now, but Dr. King was not popular in America. He was hated. He was just hated, period. People always try to draw this, Malcolm X over here, and they were both hated. They were both hated. So those same people that would have been spitting venom at Colin Kaepernick today, I just kind of put the mirror on them and be like, well, you think it's different, but how would you have felt about Dr. King? Don't just rattle off and say, oh, well, Dr. King's great. We have a holiday. No. You're that guy, or you're that lady. You're that person that was speaking out against them because they are standing for the same thing, going about two different ways of doing it. And it's a different part of the movement, but basically just standing for what's right, speaking out against, racial injustice.
That's why I think too, if I can add this little piece, that's why during the 60s, music was such an integral part of the civil rights struggle. And if you listen to the music, you can go back to the Freedom Waves recording from Smithsonian. You can listen to the SNCC Freedom Singers. You can listen to the Sweet Honey in the Rock. You can listen to all Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye. Listen to the music, the soundtrack of the 60s. And then you hear Curtis Mayfield, Keep On Pushing. You hear Marvin Gaye in the 70s, What's Going On? You hear We Shall Overcome. And then you see groups, you see collective. There's nothing more democratic than a group of musicians doing music. There's nothing more democratic than that, right? And you see them talking about, singing about the collective, but merging the art with activism. That's why in my research, I use art as an acronym, ART, a revolutionary tool, right? And then you look at the turn that we made in this era where we've gotten much more insular, far more, it's really anti-social media. We've gotten far more selfish and far more me by me. That's why you don't see any real, like even in hip hop, you don't see groups today. You see individuals. You see what I'm saying? And so the best of our tradition is one that celebrated the collective. We shall overcome, right? And it merged that art with the activism in order to inspire, in order to sort of transcend and help people understand, like they used to say in the 60s, you know, if you can't sing, sing louder. That's what they used to say.
Yeah. We out. Yeah.
Raven, did you want to share something before we move on to our last one?
I did. Just very quickly, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you. I'm so grateful to just like be in this conversation. But I wanted to say that one thing that I think is, as the white woman in the room, right, I want to just go ahead and acknowledge that is that white teachers, right, and we have, as Dr. K was saying, right, a majority of the people that are teaching, you know, our kids in our country are white women, are probably listening to this conversation and are like, yes, but that is terrifying. I don't know how to do that. And also it's hard work, right? And so I wanted to just say that part of this is that we cannot support these students without acknowledging this history that we're talking about right now, right? We cannot support our students and support their dreams if we do not embrace, right, the things that have actually happened. And I say this as a white teacher. So I'm from Louisiana, and I grew up in a white flight community, right? And people get a little weird when I talk about that, right? Where we have some of the best schools in our area, but people get a little uncomfortable when we talk about this, you know, equity work. And so I want to just say though that as the white teacher, you know, we cannot support our students' dreams and cannot support our students unless we embrace the diversity of our classroom and recognize that even if it's uncomfortable, right? Even if it's like, ooh, I don't really like doing this because it requires some unlearning. We're going to meet people like Dr. K. We're going to break apart our mindsets, right? Where it's like, oh, this perspective that I had my whole life, suddenly things are shifting. We need to embrace that, right? And it's scary, but there are ways to do that. And there are baby steps to take in order to get there. So I just wanted to say embracing that diversity can be an important step. But I know we need to move on. So let's go ahead. I want to hear some more from our presenters. So
I know this question I'm actually most excited about. So I'm hearing a lot of talk about creativity, right? Especially when dreaming big. We know Julissa is encouraging her students to do that in their classes. And we're talking about challenging thought and unlearning, right? Both of these things are required discomfort, right? Especially when we followed these paths, whether it be follow the path of an unknown dream or follow the path of this unlearning. And it's very, very uncomfortable, right? And all of you guys are talking about discomfort in some which way. And so the next question is talking about how do you deal with the discomfort, specifically meaning what have been the resources that have been the most beneficial to you in this work? And I just want to share before I share my resource for me in doing this work has been my community. Specifically Raven Cole for sure. And so the idea of having someone to turn to and do this unpacking together and talk about it as a Black woman to a white woman, or just two women in the South, or two educators, like whatever it is, having that space and community to unpack this learning and learn together has been very impactful and powerful for me. So I would love to know what resources, whether they be tangible or figurative, what resources exist for you. So let's see. Let's kick off with Dr. K. What resources exist for you that have been the most impactful in this work?
Well, that's an amazing question too.
Yeah.
And I'm a poet. People who know me, I'm a poet, and that's a metaphor for crazy. So art is, I think, key for me. I am at my best, and I think we are at our best when we are able to engage the artistic tradition out of which we come, whether you're talking about the Irish kennings, which is an Irish poetry tradition, the Jewish cantor, or in our particular context of people of Africana ancestry, we have a blues ethos, right? We have a blues ethos that goes from the Mississippi Valley across the Atlantic Ocean to the Senegalese Valley, right? So it's a deep, deep ethos of blues. And if you know what you're doing, you can draw an unbroken line between the Senegalese Valley, and you can move from there to the field hollers and on the plantations of the prison work camps. From there, you can go to the spirituals, to the blues, to jazz, to R&B, to hip hop, right? If you know what you're doing, you see that Ariadne thread connecting all of those things. So I have to engage art. I cannot conceive of a great artist who has not gone to the top, to the hilt of their craft, and has not been able to engage courageousness in their art form, both at the level of form and content, at the level of style and substance. Artists who are able to embrace courageousness, meaning I know I'm going to step out on nothing, but I have a belief, a strong, sincere belief that I'm going to land on something. So that's why courage is the enabling virtue. Christians talk about faith and hope and love. It takes courage to have faith, it takes courage to love, it takes courage to hope. But if you're a coward, then you're not interested in courageous engagement, right? Mm-hmm. So that is, to me, one of the derivative things that I get from my engagement with the arts. I'm talking about all of the arts: poetry, music, song, dance, drum, opera, everything, So in those messages, or in those art forms, are serious messages. It's really medicine for the soul that I use as a form of nourishment, as a form of healing, as a form of curriculum, as a form of spiritual engagement, so we can engage these battles that are out here for us. So if you're not dealing with art, you're not dealing with romance, and if you're not dealing with romance, then I don't want nothing to do with you.
Love it. I love it. Julissa, tell us about your resource.
I want to piggyback after Dr. Kazembe. So the music style of bomba, it's traditional Puerto Rican music. It's Afro-Latino music. And that is, I've started that, when I was in, before middle school, I want to say. And so my family is very proud of remembering where we come from and what makes Puerto Rican. And I always carry that with me. I love the work, poetry. I used to compete in slam poetry when I was younger, and reading all sorts of texts always keeps me grounded, because I continue to teach the future if we don't remember where we come from too. So that is my biggest resource: my family, my music, my culture, my people. They keep me grounded.
Love it. So I know I'm like, all right, Kevin, what's yours?
Man, this is, I'm just glad to be here right there. It's more like it. Honestly, I've been dipping my toe into the African experience in Latin America, and that is a whole nother animal. So salute, Julissa. I've heard that term of that art form before, and Dr. K, you still got me thinking about waterboarding Jesus, because that is a true statement. I can't get out of my mind, but I want to piggyback off of you, Raven. Salute. I talk to a lot of my colleagues, my white female colleagues, about this every now and again. I don't beat them over the head with it, but I just kind of put it in their brains, because I know they're the largest force in my profession. They just make up the boat. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, it's my hope that, you know, that you could look back in the history and say, okay, well, this group of people like put in the work, did the work to do the right thing. Dr. K is not lying. Like that. Courage. Like I can't sugarcoat it any more than that. Like, because there is, as Lena said, you're gonna be uncomfortable. Like, there's no way around that. The conversations we have in staff meetings, the conversations you have with students, the conversations you have with your colleagues, they are uncomfortable. But as I always say, I'm like, well, Black folks been uncomfortable. Like, come on, join the club. Like, we don't all have to be uncomfortable, but it's gonna take a stepping out, like stepping out of your comfort zone, and that is almost the crux. That's the hardest part about dealing with systemic racism period, because keeping it 100, white folks in America, they, at least the perception, they don't have to. I don't have to deal with racism. Like, even though it's a created and it's perpetuated by white folks, you could ignore it, be white, and be fine. Like, and it's like, but it's that problem that was created affects people. And so, to your point, Raven, it's like you want to get to the core of not just healing, but being about your brothers and being about your sisters. Like, you're gonna have to, you know, as a group, as a whole, especially in this profession. Like, Dr. K is working with, you know, the younglings that are coming in. I can't, whatever they're paying you, brother, is not enough, because that's a whole nother can of worms. Like, you know, not just generational, but, you know, like you said, how do I get somebody to see and understand something that they've never seen, and it's very difficult for them to understand? And as you used the word before, you know, like, I hear the word unlearning, and that is true. That is difficult work to unlearn, because just like white folks have been indoctrinated with stuff, Black folks have too. We grew up in the same society. We've seen the same images. It just so happens that we're usually on the negative end of the images, but that can do something to someone's mind, you know, right there. So
yeah,
going back to the listening part, like, it's like people have to be willing to step out and be courageous. Like, and I agree with both Dr. K and Julissa. I think art, poetry, and music is a great gateway to do that. I would even argue it's probably the best pill to take to do that. And, you know, and then maybe food comes next, but there's got to be something. But at the end of the day, I can't force somebody to step out of their comfort zone. Like, they have to be willing, and not just, you know, lip service, or, you know, we're talking about equity day at the staff meeting. Like, it can't just be that. You got to actually do it, which means a whole lot of being uncomfortable pretty much all the time, you know, which is the state of, you know, the African-American experience in America. Like, you're kind of always looking over your shoulder. You're always uncomfortable. And that's hard for people to understand who just haven't been uncomfortable in that way. And I'm like, that's part of the journey, the struggle, the journey. You gonna have to be uncomfortable. So salute,
Yeah.
Raven. Like, I hear you. Like, keep doing the work and keep being uncomfortable. Like, but yeah, it's a whole army of white women that I'm like, you got to get used to being uncomfortable. It's okay. It's the only way.
Yeah, I do want to, like, I just know based on my own experiences, like, white women, it is difficult, right? It is uncomfortable. Some of the things that are happening in our chat right now, it's like, we got to talk about discomfort is a natural part of the process. Thank you, Dr. K, for putting that in the chat, because it is. And until we can acknowledge as white people that white supremacy is pervasive in our system, right? We need to acknowledge these things. And I know that it's uncomfortable and it's nerve-wracking, but we have to do it, right? And so just because we're uncomfortable doesn't mean we don't do the work. And change, you know, it's good. This growth is good. And so I do just want to go ahead and throw this out there, right? And this connects to what Selena's talking about with resources, right? On how to do this work and how to do growth, right? Community is a big part of that. And so I just want to extend this invitation to any teacher or educator that's listening right now. If you need that community, or if you have questions and you want to begin that work of like, hey, I do want to dismantle this system that I can see is really horrible, reach out. right? We are Lab Education at Lab Education _, but you can Google us. We're on all social media. And if you want someone to talk to about this and where to get started, I'm happy to help. And so I just wanted to extend that invitation. Before we close out, because we're almost done, Selena, I'm going to give you a second to open it back up, but we are almost done. So Selena.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so many thoughts to share. I'm like, y'all sure we don't have another 50 minutes? Because we can go. But but I don't know. Just as far as unlearning, just to close on that, I feel like it's really important to remember that while we can do all of the learning and everything that we can, there is a point that you just never will achieve. And that is fully understanding that other person's perspective, whatever it is that perspective is. I'm a person who has not experienced trauma, so I will never be a person to understand that experience and need to remember that. And when talking with people and being a learner of their experiences. And then same for like Raven was talking about being a white woman, talking about Black experiences. Raven has done a ton of research. She is a great listener, but at the end of the day, she won't ever know my experience. We've been friends for 8 years, and there's that awareness that she also has when we talk, and it's a beautiful thing. So remember that if you're listening, you won't ever get there, but you can be an excellent listener. So before we close out, you guys, if there is anything you guys want to close out with, meaning your like how to find you or a closing thought, we can kind of have a couple seconds for that before Raven closes us out for the day.
Well, yeah, thank you again for the organizers of this session and indeed the entire conference. And thank you to my co-presenters, Brother Kevin Colbert, Sister Julissa. Thank you all. I just wanted to close out by, reminding people that, the best way to defeat ignorance is to read books. It's the best way. And I work at the IUPUI in the School of Education. I'm very easy to find. My email and phone number, address is well published. I ain't hiding from nobody, ain't running from nobody. And I also teach in the Africana Studies program there. So in our School of Education, we have what I think is the best school of education in the state, dare I say the region. We're doing some serious work with Indiana educators. We received a really huge grant a couple of years ago to do equity work through IDOE, and in that time, 2.5 years later, we've touched thousands of educators, tens of thousands of students. So the IUPUI School of Education is really walking the walk and talking the talk. And we visit the website there, have any number of events and things that are coming up. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to share any resources that I have. And if you get a chance, speaking of art, shameless self-plug, check out my blues poetry opera called The Voodoo of Hell's Half Acre. That's an homage to Richard Wright, the great Richard Wright. I'll drop the link in the chat if anybody wants to check that out. So thank you again.
Yes, the link in the chat would be great. Julissa, how can we find you?
Thank you all again for this opportunity and for allowing me the opportunity to share space with you all today, even if it is in a virtual setting. You could find me, I'm learning Twitter, so follow me on Twitter at MissGoyaso1, and the same for Instagram. So yeah, that's how you can find me, and I teach in Washington Township, so I'm around there all the time.
I'm old school, so just like Dr. Kat, I ain't hard to find. I teach at Pike. I'll put my email in the link. I'm Julissa, I'm not up on the Twitter yet and not on the gram. So yeah, just old school. Come through and give me a knock with your mask on, or shoot me an email at Ke.Colbert at pike.k12.in.us. I'll put my email in there. And I'm an educator here at Pike High School and teaching township. So not hard to find.
Amazing. Thank y'all so much. So thank you once again to our presenters. I do want to encourage everyone. We're talking a lot about resources. We have a hashtag #DreamWith for this event. Tweet out your resources, right? Those of you that are viewing this right now or those that are presenting, please make sure you're using that hashtag with some of these amazing resources because I want to know. I'll be following it. So thanks again to our viewers. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you so much for our organizers. So on behalf of Keep Indiana Learning, the diversity and equity and inclusion tactic team, y'all are incredible. Thank you so much for organizing this. Okay, thank y'all so much and goodbye.